AITA for suing my brother and his wife after they let their kids destroy my house. It all started a couple of months ago when I had to be rushed to the hospital. A stomach ulcer I had been ignoring for too long ruptured, and I ended up spending 11 days in the hospital, including minor surgery and a slow recovery. My family knew I wasn't well. Even my brother, with whom I have a, let's say, tolerable relationship, came to visit me once with his wife and their 3 kids. During that visit, they offered to help with the house, saying they could stay there for a few days to keep the place in order while I recovered. Even though something in my gut, and it wasn't the ulcer, told me it was a bad idea, I agreed. I didn't have anyone else nearby I could trust, and I didn't think they would do anything really bad. Huge mistake. One of those mistakes that leaves you speechless for weeks and wanting to install cameras even on the mailbox. First, when I was discharged, I called my brother to tell him I'd be home the next day. He hesitated for a second and then told me it was no problem, but maybe he'd need a few more days to clean up. That set off alarm bells, but I tried to think maybe he meant unwashed dishes or something minimal. I was way off. When I got home the next day, what I found was, honestly, it looked like a tornado had gone through the place. I swear, no exaggeration. All my plants were dead or knocked over. The sofa had juice and grease stains. There were crayon marks all over the hallway walls. The dining room rug, one I had inherited from my grandmother, was ruined with acrylic paint. And the main bathroom, a disaster. There was urine on the floor around the toilet, and wet toilet paper was thrown everywhere, as if someone had tried to redecorate during a fit of rage. My brother, of course, had already taken his family away a few hours before I arrived. He left me a note written on a half-torn sheet of notebook paper, saying something like, "Thanks for letting us stay at the house. The kids had a lot of fun. Sorry if it's a bit messy." A bit messy? I felt like framing that note, just to remind myself never again to trust anyone without cameras recording. I opened the refrigerator, completely empty. And not empty like, we ate some things. Empty like, we took even the ice from the freezer. They even took a dozen craft beers I had been saving for special occasions. And they didn't drink them there. They took them. I know because one of my neighbors told me days later that he had seen my brother carrying bags full of stuff from my house to his car over the weekend. He thought he was helping me out. How naive. I was too. The real problem, the one that infuriates me, is that my nephews have no limits. There are 3 of them, between 7 and 12 years old, and they all act like the world is a rule-free amusement park. It's not 100% their fault, obviously. It's the kind of lax, irresponsible, kids will be kids parenting that my brother and his wife always defended. They let them do whatever they want, and when there are consequences, they minimize them or blame others. It's always been like that. When they broke a mirror at our parents' house a couple of years ago, it was because that mirror was poorly placed. When they broke the back window of my car throwing rocks while playing ninjas, it was because kids need space to imagine. This time, they crossed a line I refused to ignore. I spent the next 3 days taking photos, recording videos, documenting everything. I contacted my insurance, but since there was no theft or natural disaster, most of the damage wasn't covered. I called my brother. At first, he acted surprised, then moved on to denial, then dropped this gem on me. Well, if your house is so bad, it's because you had it full of delicate things. My kids didn't know what they could touch and what they couldn't. I felt a mix of rage, frustration, and something I couldn't quite define, like when you realize a relationship is beyond repair. It's not just that they destroyed my things. It's that nobody took responsibility. Nobody cleaned up. Nobody replaced anything. Nobody even had the decency to call me beforehand and say, "Hey, something serious happened." They left everything just like that, as if I should accept the damage as partly my fault for trusting them, as if I was overreacting for wanting things back the way they were. But they can't go back, not when you've seen what your own flesh and blood is capable of. Never in my life did I imagine I'd end up in a situation where I had to sue my own brother, but after seeing how he and his wife acted as if what they did was a simple childish prank and not a complete abuse of trust, I knew I couldn't let it go. Throughout my life, I was always the type to let things slide to keep the peace, especially with family. But there's a line that, once crossed, doesn't let you sleep peacefully if you don't do something. And this time they crossed it like it was a racetrack. After documenting everything and talking to the insurance, I contacted a lawyer. Not a big, expensive one. I just wanted to know if I had grounds for a small claims lawsuit. The guy was very clear. Yes, and with plenty of evidence. He suggested suing for the cost of furniture repair, professional cleaning, missing items, and minor structural damage. He also advised me to include the emotional cost of the matter. I was just out of the hospital, recovering, and what I needed was rest, not cleaning dried urine off the floor and getting crayon marks off the ceiling. Because yes, someone, probably the middle one, climbed on a chair and drew on the kitchen ceiling. With that in mind, I sent my brother a certified letter, formally written with the lawyer's help, explaining that I was starting the legal process to make him take responsibility for the damages. And that's when all hell broke loose. My phone blew up for the next 3 days. Calls, texts, emails, even passive-aggressive comments on social media. My brother first tried the classic. Are you seriously going to do this over some stains and a few beers? When he saw I wasn't responding, he went on the attack. He told me I was always the bitter loner of the family, that I never understood what it was like to have kids, that my house was already a mess before they arrived. He denied everything, even though I have photos of the house before I went to the hospital and how I found it when I returned. After that, his wife jumped into the drama. She wrote me a very long email full of justifications, excuses, and emotional guilt-tripping, that her kids were suffering because of this fight, that they only wanted to help, that I should thank them for not leaving the house empty all those days, that maybe they exaggerated a bit, but suing was going too far. The worst part was when they used my parents. They called me to say that you don't sue family, that I should find a way to talk it out, fix it between us. I listened to them because I respect them, but I told them something very clearly. If there had been any real intention of taking responsibility, this never would have reached this point. I explained how they left everything, how they responded with mockery, and how they weren't even capable of bringing me some food when I got out of the hospital. I was alone, weak, with my stomach a wreck, and the only thing I received from my immediate family was a disaster, a betrayal, and a note written as if they had just left after a vacation, not an invasion. My parents understood. Not completely, but they understood the basics. This wasn't a sibling fight over a video game or inheritance. It was a matter of respect, of responsibility. They told me they couldn't choose sides, but they wouldn't interfere anymore either. Meanwhile, I kept fixing everything. I had to pay for a deep cleaning of the house, almost $300. The dining room rug was ruined beyond saving, and it was an antique piece that can no longer be replaced. It hurt to lose it. I had to repaint walls, change curtains, replace a broken doorknob on a bathroom door. The little things add up, and so do the costs. Not counting the missing food, the paint-stained clothes, and the small appliances that are still missing to this day. Among them, a blender I had received as a gift last Christmas that was practically new. It simply vanished. Guess who had it? When I went to my brother's house weeks later to try to talk to him in person, there it was, in his kitchen, like nothing happened. I recognized it by a small scratch on the base. I didn't claim it. I turned around and left. The court hearing is scheduled for a couple of weeks from now. I'm not going to ask for thousands of dollars, just what's fair, about $1,200 to cover damages, replacements, and the cost of the lawyer who is advising me for a flat fee. But what I really want isn't the money. It's for them to understand that this wasn't an accident. It was negligence. It was an abuse of trust. It was a sign that I can't keep putting up with things just because we share blood. The saddest part of all is that my nephews don't even seem to understand what they did. The last time I saw them at my parents' house, the youngest looked at me with a "why are you mad?" expression, as if wrecking my home was a game, as if someone had told them everything was fine, that I was the weird one for getting angry. And that's the real problem. Their parents taught them there are no consequences. The day of the hearing arrived, and although I wasn't expecting anything too dramatic, this wasn't a movie or a TV trial, my legs were still shaking. Not from fear of losing the case, but because of what it symbolized. Having to stand before a judge and explain how my own brother destroyed my trust and my home, and how his family treated me as if I were the guilty one for being sick. The courtroom was small. There were a couple of people waiting for their own cases, minor disputes, the rustling of papers, the typical murmur. My brother arrived with his wife. They didn't bring a lawyer. They looked like they were about to attend a funeral, their own. They didn't even greet me. I was with the lawyer I hired, just to help me present the documentation properly, but he didn't even have to speak. He had done his job well beforehand. Everything was organized in folders with dates, photos, estimates, and even screenshots of the messages exchanged with my brother. I had proof of everything, and that was key. When they called us up, the judge was direct. He asked us to state our cases. I went first. I tried not to sound emotional, although inside I had a contained rage that was hard to control. I explained that I had been hospitalized, that I left my house in my brother's care, that upon returning I found it wrecked. I described the damages, showed the photos, showed the estimate from the cleaning service, the receipts for paint, the expenses for food and missing items. I showed the note he left me and the messages where he basically told me it was my fault for leaving valuable things within his children's reach. The judge listened without interrupting. Then it was my brother's turn, and there, for the first time, I saw him genuinely nervous. He stammered a bit. He said he didn't remember the house being that bad, that the kids played a little rough, that he thought everything was replaceable. His wife didn't speak, but she didn't take her eyes off the judge, as if that could help. It was obvious they hadn't prepared for this. They brought no evidence, didn't refute anything I presented. They just focused on trying to appeal to the judge's emotional side, that the children were very sad about all this, that he had already apologized, which never happened, that this was tearing the family apart. The judge remained silent for a few seconds, and then said something that still stuck in my head. A family isn't broken by a lawsuit. It's broken when one of its members betrays the trust of another and refuses to repair the damage. Sir, you had plenty of time to act before this reached here. That moment hurt because, although he was right, it also meant there was no turning back from what I was doing. This wasn't just a claim for money. It was the point of no return. The ruling was in my favor. My brother has to pay me $1,237 within 45 days. The judge didn't impose any additional fines or ask for major penalties. He just ordered that my justified expenses be reimbursed. I didn't ask for more. I never did. I just wanted them to take responsibility. As we were leaving, my brother caught up with me in the parking lot. He called my name, not aggressively, but with a mixture of weariness and resentment. He told me I had humiliated his family, that I made him look like a bad father in front of the judge, and that his kids were crying because Uncle hates them. I responded with the truth, that I don't hate them, that I never wanted it to come to this, but that if he had acted like a responsible adult from day one, none of this would have happened. He tried to keep talking, but I cut him off. Not because I felt superior, but because I understood it wouldn't do any good. He wasn't looking to resolve anything, just wanted to feel less guilty. I got in my car and left. The following days were strange. Part of me felt relief. Justice was served, the damage was acknowledged, a consequence was imposed. But another part felt empty. This was my brother. We hadn't been close for years, but still, he was my family. We had grown up together, shared a room during childhood, went to the same school, had inside jokes no one else understood, and now all that felt dead. He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Neither did I, until an envelope arrived with a check. No note, no apology, no signature, just the check. I took it to the bank, deposited it, and it cleared. It felt like closing a door without really closing anything. Shortly after, my mother called. She wanted to organize a family dinner to smooth things over. I told her I could go, but I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay, that if my brother tried to blame me for something or act as if I were the one exaggerating, I would get up from the table and leave. She asked me to, at least for that night, try to be calm. I didn't promise her anything. The dinner was awkward. Very. My nephews barely looked at me. The youngest tried to give me a hug, and I allowed it. But I couldn't help noticing he was glancing at his father out of the corner of his eye, as if seeking approval. My brother and his wife acted as if nothing had happened, as if it were all part of the past, and now we could move on. There were no apologies, no conversation, just forced silence and overly salty dishes. That night, I understood something that was hard to accept. My family wasn't destroyed by what happened in my house. It had been broken long before. This just brought to light everything that had been wrong for years. The problem was never the kids. It was that no one taught them what was right and what was wrong. And now I realize they probably don't want to learn either. After that family dinner, where everyone pretended nothing had happened, as if the whole issue was just a political argument at the Christmas table, something changed in me. I don't know if it was resignation or acceptance, but I understood I was never going to get a real apology. Not from my brother, not from his wife, and maybe not from their kids, who were growing up in a house where doing the right thing wasn't a priority, but keeping up appearances was. In the days following that dinner, whenever I thought about how I'd gotten to that point, I was filled with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. I didn't want to fight anymore, but I couldn't ignore everything that had happened either. And just when I felt like things were finally calming down, I had been paid what was fair, my house was about 80% recovered, and I was no longer receiving passive-aggressive messages from anyone. The next blow came. The school. Yes, my nephew's school. It turns out that a few months after the court case, the oldest of the three, the 12-year-old, started getting into serious trouble at school, stealing school supplies, vandalism in the bathrooms, pushing other kids during recess. And although I'm not his guardian or anything, my name started coming up. Why? Because, according to him, everything was my fault. That since Uncle sued Dad, things at home were horrible. They were stricter. They couldn't do anything anymore. The atmosphere was toxic, and his life had become miserable since then. I know because the school counselor called me. Apparently, the boy had had a major aggressive episode with a teacher, and when they took him to the principal's office, he said his family was broken because of the bitter uncle who hates them. Just like that, literally. When I received the call, I was silent for a few seconds. Not because what he said hurt me. At this point, nothing surprises me anymore. But because I realized he was growing up exactly as I had feared, without understanding the difference between a fair consequence and a betrayal. I clarified to the counselor that I didn't live with them, that I didn't have daily contact with the boy, and that if she really wanted to understand what was happening in that home, she should talk to his parents. But inside, I couldn't help feeling a certain responsibility, not for having acted wrongly, because I hadn't, but for having been the mirror that shattered the illusion they were living in. They used me as an excuse. It suited them to paint me as the villain so they wouldn't have to face the reality of their own failings. And now their kids were doing the same. I was the enemy, not the limits they never had, not the actions they never corrected. Me. Days later, I ran into the middle one, the 9-year-old, at the supermarket. He was with his mother. He saw me and looked down. She pretended not to see me, but as I passed nearby, he barely murmured, "Hi, Uncle." I managed to say hi back, reflexively, but the scene left me thinking. Could it be that he understood a little more? Could it be that he was trapped in all this and didn't know how to act? Or was he simply confused? That same week, my parents invited me to a small family gathering at their house. Just us, my siblings and them. I hesitated, but I went. I didn't feel like it, but I didn't want to be the absent one everyone uses to justify their own misery. I wanted to see them with my own eyes. And what a surprise, there they all were, my brother, his wife, and the 3 kids. They acted calm, as if everything was in order, but as soon as I sat down at the table, I felt the tension. There was no open anger, but there was that discomfort you feel when no one dares to talk about the elephant in the room. Until they did. My brother, at one point, picked up his glass of water and said, "Well, since we're all here, I want to say something." We looked at him. We all knew something was coming. I don't want this to continue like this. Not for us, but for the kids. They're confused, angry, and they don't understand why the family is divided anymore. I think you should talk to them. Tell them you don't hate them, that this wasn't personal, that it was a misunderstanding. It took me a second to process that sentence. A misunderstanding? I almost laughed, but I held back. I replied, as calmly as I could. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a huge screw-up that you refused to own up to. I can't pretend everything is okay to make the job easier that you, as parents, aren't doing. I don't hold a grudge against your kids, but I'm not going to lie to them just so they can sleep soundly. If they're angry, let them be angry. If they have questions, let them ask. But don't use me as a scapegoat so you don't have to explain what really happened. That's when it blew up. His wife jumped down my throat, saying I was resentful, that I didn't understand how hard it is to raise 3 kids, that while I lived alone with my expensive coffee maker, they had to stretch every dollar and keep smiling, that it wasn't fair for me to dump the world on them over a few crayons and stains. My brother said nothing. He stared at his plate. My parents tried to calm things down, but it was too late. I got up from the table, told them that if they couldn't take responsibility in front of their own children, I had nothing more to do there, and I left. That was the last time I spoke to them for more than 5 minutes. Since then, the messages stopped, the calls too. Nobody called me uncle again. Nobody asked me for explanations again. It was as if they had decided the most comfortable thing was to pretend I didn't exist. And sometimes I think maybe that's for the best. If you've ever had a family that functions like a pressure cooker, you know what I mean when I say there are times when nothing happens, and that's more unsettling than when everything explodes. After that last scene at my parents' house, what followed was a heavy silence. Weeks without messages, 0 calls, nothing on social media. My brother and his wife had blocked me or simply stopped following me. I didn't care much about the digital block, but the fact that they didn't even attempt a minimal conversation with a shred of honesty left a strange taste in my mouth, as if they truly thought the problem could be solved with distance, as if ignoring me could reset everything. My parents still talked to me, though very cautiously. You could tell they felt like they were walking on eggshells whenever they mentioned any of my nephews. Sometimes they wanted to act as if nothing had happened, and other times, they had the impulse for family reconciliation that, honestly, I was tired of. They didn't understand, or didn't want to understand, that this wasn't just a disagreement. It was a consequence, a boundary. And even though they didn't like it, I wasn't going to move it. The bomb exploded again a month later. This time not at my house, or in a courtroom. It was at the kids' school. One afternoon, I got a message from my mother with a link to a video circulating in a neighborhood WhatsApp group. In the video, recorded by a kid on his phone, you could see my oldest nephew. Yes, the same one, pushing another kid against a row of lockers and yelling something like, "You don't know anything. My uncle's a traitor." After the push, a real fight broke out. Punches, shouts, a teacher running from the background to separate them. The video lasted about 40 seconds, but it was more than enough to understand the severity. That same night, my father called to tell me that my nephew had been suspended for a week and that the school was considering a more severe sanction if it happened again. He told me my brother was overwhelmed and that his wife was convinced I had psychologically damaged her son, that all of this, the aggression, the problems at school, the angry outbursts, were the direct result of the conflict we had had. I don't know whether to laugh or scream, was the first thing I thought. I stayed silent for a few seconds and then replied, "Dad, do you really believe I'm the cause of all this? Or could it be that you're seeing firsthand what happens when you raise a kid without limits or consequences, and someone outside the family unit, like me, refuses to play along?" He didn't answer. He said something like, "I'm not taking sides," but you could tell this whole thing was weighing on him. And I get it. Nobody likes to see their family fall apart over something that, in theory, could have been avoided with a simple conversation and a bit of responsibility. But we weren't in theory anymore. We were in reality. And in reality, broken things don't get fixed by ignoring them. Over the weekend, I ran into the neighbor across the street, the one who had seen my brother carrying bags out of my house that time while I was hospitalized. He asked how things were going, and when I told him the latest, he looked at me with a face somewhere between pity and, "I told you so." He said something that stuck with me. "You know this doesn't end here, right? These kids are growing up with a twisted idea of how the world works. And when the world doesn't respond the way they expect, they're going to blame anyone but themselves. It started with you, but next, it'll be everyone." And that's when I started to feel something I hadn't felt until then. Fear. Fear that this wasn't just a family fight. Fear that I was watching, from my position as a forced observer, the future disaster of these 3 kids slowly brewing. Because if at 12 they're already physically attacking classmates over things they don't even understand, what are they going to do when they're 16, 18? When the anger isn't just directed at an uncle, but at anyone who tells them no. I started wondering if I should get more involved, if I should talk to a counselor, maybe even social services. But I knew that would only make things worse. They would see it as another attack from me, another excuse to play the victim. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to fight them anymore. I had done what I had to do. I set the boundary, paid the emotional consequences, went to court, fixed my house, and tried to move on with my life. Or I was trying to. But then something else happened, and this time it had nothing to do with my brother. One Sunday afternoon, while walking in the park near my house, I saw the 2 younger nephews on their bikes. I was surprised to see them without their parents, but you could tell it wasn't the first time they'd gone out alone. They were calm, playing, racing each other to see who could get to a concrete bench fastest. They didn't see me. I sat on another bench farther away and just watched them for a few minutes. In that moment, I didn't see monsters. I saw normal kids, laughing, with scraped knees and dirt-covered sneakers. And I felt a deep sadness because they still had a chance. If someone taught them now what respect, forgiveness, responsibility were, maybe they could take another path. Maybe it wasn't too late. I debated whether to approach them or not. In the end, I didn't. I didn't want to ruin their afternoon. But that night, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not a formal letter or a legal letter. A sincere letter to my 2 younger nephews. I told them I didn't hate them, that I didn't hold a grudge, that I understood they often just followed what they saw. I told them I was hurt by what happened, but that I still believed they could do the right thing. That if they ever wanted to come to my house to watch a movie or play a video game, the door would be open, but first I needed just one thing: an apology. Nothing more. A couple of weeks had passed since I wrote the letter, and it was still sitting in the same drawer, unmoved. Every time I opened that drawer for some other reason, I'd see it there, half hidden under some papers, and I'd stare at it for a few seconds. I didn't know whether to send it, tear it up, or forget about everything. Writing it had helped, yes, but I was afraid it would end up in the trash, ignored, or worse, used against me as another emotional maneuver by the resentful uncle. In the midst of this indecision, something happened that I didn't see coming. One afternoon, just as I was getting back from work, I saw someone sitting on the front porch steps of my house. It was the middle one, my 9-year-old nephew. He was alone, his bike lying on the grass, hands on his knees, staring at the ground. I stayed in the car for a few seconds, processing the scene. I didn't know whether to get out or drive around the block to see if he was still there. And then what? Not because seeing him bothered me, but because I had no idea what to do about it. I got out. I approached slowly, as if trying not to spook a scared animal. When he saw me, he stood up abruptly, but he didn't leave. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just stood there, looking at each other, as if neither of us knew how to break the thick ice of months of distance, fights, and silence. Until he spoke. My mom doesn't know I came. He blurted it out like a confession. And it was. I understood he had probably snuck out or managed to leave without explaining. My first thought was that this could bring more drama, but I forced myself not to think about that right now. So why did you come? I asked him. He lowered his head. Because I don't like that we're fighting. And my brother says you hate us, but I don't believe that. You were cool before, and I want you to be my uncle again. That hit me hard. I didn't say anything at first. I felt like if I said anything, my voice would tremble. I swallowed the lump in my throat, sat down on the step, and gestured for him to sit too. He did. I told him I never hated them, that I was very angry, yes, but not at him. I explained, as if talking to a miniature adult, that when someone hurts you and then doesn't acknowledge it, it's very difficult to go on as if nothing happened, and that sometimes grown-ups do bad things, and other times they do nothing when they should. I told him I didn't expect him to understand everything, but that I was very glad he had come. We talked about lighter things after that, about his school, his bike, a new game he wanted but his older brother wouldn't let him use. He asked if he could come inside for a bit, see if I still had the console we used to play together. And yes, I still have it. So we went inside, played for half an hour. I forgot about everything that had happened for a little while. Before he left, I told him something else. I have something for you and your little brother. It's a letter. I wrote it a while ago, but I didn't know if you guys wanted to know how I felt. Now I see you do. I went to the drawer, took out the envelope, and gave it to him. He looked at it as if it were fragile. He told me he would keep it and read it with his brother. I asked if he needed me to take him home, but he said he'd go by himself, that if he was late he'd make up an excuse like he got a flat tire or something. I laughed. I shouldn't have, but I laughed. I watched him pedal to the corner, look both ways, and disappear. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. I answered. It was my brother. He spoke directly, which was new for him. I heard my son was at your house. He didn't sound angry, but not calm either. Yes, I replied. He showed up alone. I didn't invite him. I didn't know he was coming. There was a long silence. Then, in a strange, kind of worn-out voice, he said, he read me the letter. To his brother too. They say they want to see you more, that they don't care what happened, that you treated them well, that they learned their lesson. I didn't know what to say. Neither did he. And then, as if breaking an old habit, he said, I don't know if it helps any, but you were right. I spent my whole life justifying everything. I never set limits for them, and now I'm paying for it. Not with you, with them. They don't listen to me. They don't respect me. They don't even believe me. And I think it's because they never saw me act like a real adult. I stayed silent. Not because I didn't have a response, but because that was the first time in this whole story that my brother didn't speak defensively. He didn't play the victim, didn't blame me. He just told the truth, or part of it at least. We didn't make peace. No wound was closed. But that was the first step toward something different. Since that day, I started seeing the two younger boys more often. They'd stop by the house once or twice a week. We played, watched movies, talked about anything. We didn't talk about the past. There was no need. Their way of apologizing wasn't with words, it was with actions. The oldest, however, remained a ghost. I didn't see him, he didn't talk to me. According to my parents, he was still in his own world, angry at everything, convinced he was right. And honestly, I didn't know anymore if I was worried or if it just hurt. Several weeks passed after that call with my brother, and although I didn't speak to him again after that, things seemed to be settling down, at least in one part of the picture. The two younger nephews came over with some regularity, and each visit felt like a small act of repair. They didn't talk about the lawsuit, or the ruined house, or the yelling. They just behaved like normal kids. Calm, curious, grateful. And that was enough for me, at least for now. But as you can imagine, calm never lasts too long when there's a ticking time bomb around. And in this case, the bomb was the oldest of the three, the same one who from day one refused to see his part of the blame, who became the leader of the traitor uncle narrative, and who now, according to my parents, had become a completely closed-off, sullen, irritable kid. Not aggressive, at least not physically, but with a look in his eyes that was scarier than any insult. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the garage fixing some things when someone knocked on the door. I went to open it and found him there, the oldest one, standing, alone, no backpack, no bike, just a face I couldn't immediately decipher. For a second, I hesitated. I didn't know whether to close the door on him, ask him what he wanted, or just stay silent. Finally, I said, "Everything okay?" He shrugged. "Can I come in?" I opened the door without saying anything else. He came in. He sat on the couch without asking permission and looked around as if he'd never been there before, even though he had spent entire afternoons playing in that same room just a year ago. His body was tense, like he was ready to explode, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was low, almost a whisper. "I know I messed up your house, and I'm the bad guy in the movie for everyone, but I also know I acted like an idiot." I sat in a chair across from him. I didn't say anything, just let him continue. "I don't know why I got so mad at you. Maybe because you were the only one who told me how things were. Because at home, nobody told me no. Only you. And when you did, it was like you dropped a wall on me. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to react." He shrugged again, looked at the floor. He looked defeated, not in a victim way, but like someone who no longer has the energy to keep pushing a narrative even he doesn't believe. I'm repeating the year. I got into a fist fight with another kid at school and got suspended for 2 weeks. My parents are all over me now, but it's too late. I don't care about anything anymore. Or I thought I didn't. But the other day I saw my brothers coming back from your house, and they were happy. They were talking like before, about things they did, about movies, about games, and it hit me. He said it looking straight at me. "I realized you're not the enemy." I was. I ruined everything. And, well, I just wanted to say it. It was the messiest, most awkward, and most honest apology I had heard in a long time. There were no tears, no hugs, but in his clumsy way, he was asking for forgiveness. I offered him something to drink. He stayed for an hour. We played something quick on the console, barely talking, like two people who don't need to fill the silence. In the end, when he got up to leave, he said, "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I want to stop screwing up. If you want, I mean." I put a hand on his shoulder. "It doesn't get fixed overnight, but coming here was a good first step." And that was it. He left. The next day, I got a message from my brother. Short. It just said, "Thanks for seeing him. Didn't think he'd do it." I replied, "Didn't think he'd come either, but I'm glad he did." And there, for the first time, I started to feel like something was really changing. I'm not saying everything was resolved. There are scars that don't disappear. I still have the ruined rug stuffed in a bag in the garage because I haven't brought myself to throw it away. There are still crayon marks that the paint didn't quite cover in a corner of the hallway. But what I was seeing now was something else. Intention, a desire to repair, willingness. Weeks went by, and the oldest started coming over once in a while. Always alone. His brothers came more often and no longer needed me to call them. They'd ring the bell and come in as if it were their second home. They never left a mess again. They never took anything without permission again. They started helping me with small things, taking out the trash, tidying up, watering the plants. They didn't do it out of obligation. They did it because they knew they had something to prove, and they were doing it well. One afternoon, while we were watching a movie, the youngest asked if he could invite his dad to come over too. I fell silent. Thought about it. I told him, when he's ready to come and apologize, the door will be open. He didn't push, just nodded. And now we're at this strange point, as if we're rebuilding something with pieces that don't quite fit, but at least they're not scattered on the floor anymore. The family is still broken, yes, but it's no longer a battlefield. It's a ruined workshop where, for the first time, someone is willing to put up a wall, even if it's just with duct tape. I don't know what will happen next, if my brother will ever have the courage to look me in the eye and own up to what he did, if his wife will stop seeing me as the cause of everything. I don't know if we'll ever be family again in the classic sense. But I do know that my nephews are learning something different now, and that, hopefully, that will change their path. I never thought this story would have a final part. Not because I expected it to go on forever, but because you don't realize the real end of something until you're in it. And honestly, I now believe the end isn't a big scene, or a grand speech, or a dramatic reconciliation. Sometimes, the end is simply a quiet afternoon, without upheavals, with a silence that no longer feels heavy. And that's what started to happen. Weeks turned into months. It wasn't a neat or perfect process. It had its ups and downs. Sometimes the kids came, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes my brother would send a dry text message, as if testing the waters to see if there was room for something more. I'd reply with the same energy, nothing more, nothing less. Communication with his wife remained cut off, and I don't think that will change anytime soon. She was always more concerned with how everything looked than with what was really happening. She never admitted anything, never took responsibility, and at some point, I stopped expecting her to. The important thing, and what honestly made me write this last part, was what happened one Sunday in June. It was one of those quiet days, with mild heat, where nothing and everything happens at once. I was in the yard, trimming some bushes that had gotten out of control, when I heard voices. The three nephews were walking down the sidewalk, and behind them, my brother. Not in a car, not in a hurry, walking. I stood still. The kids came in first, as was usual by now. They started playing with a ball in the yard. My brother stayed at the entrance, hands in his pockets. I looked at him without saying anything. He was the one who spoke. I don't want to talk much. I just came to shake your hand and say that, although it's late, I know I was wrong. And if there's anything left of a brother in you, I'd like to get it back. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't redemptive, but it was real. And at this point, that was enough for me. I walked over, shook his hand. There was no hug, no tears, just that simple gesture marking the end of a stupid pride that had separated us for so long. He stayed for a while. We played an impromptu kickabout with the kids. We laughed when the youngest tripped over the ball and fell on his butt. There was something different in the air, as if we were finally breathing something other than resentment. Later, before leaving, my brother told me something I'm still processing. The kids tell me everything they do with you. And you don't know how grateful I am that you didn't let them go. I did, partly. I hid behind excuses. You didn't. You taught them what I never dared to. I told them not to make me out to be a hero, that I had also been full of anger and the urge to cut ties forever, that my patience was wearing thin, and that if I stuck around, it was for them. Yes, but also for myself. Because if I didn't set a boundary, if I didn't defend my house, my things, my peace, I would lose myself. He left without saying more. The kids went back to their homes after a while. I stayed alone in the yard, listening to the silence. And that's when I understood that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about resisting, about holding on when everything in you tells you it would be easier to let go, and still staying firm in your place. The conflict with my brother changed me. Not for the worse, but not immediately for the better either. It hardened me for a time, made me distrustful, made me check every corner of my house with the paranoia of someone who's already experienced betrayal. But it also forced me to grow, to set boundaries, to understand that family isn't sacred by default. It's earned, it's cared for, it's built. and it can also be ruined. Now, the relationship is at that fragile point where anything could break it again, but also where it could strengthen if nurtured. The kids, at least, are on a better path. They're understanding that their actions have weight, that there are adults who won't applaud everything they do, and that it's okay to make mistakes, as long as they take responsibility. That's already much more than they had a year ago. Have I forgiven my brother? Not completely, but I'm trying. Do I trust him? Not blindly, but that constant rage is gone. Are we family again? I suppose, in a way, yes. Scarred, but yes. And if you're reading this because you've gone through something similar, I'll just tell you this. Set your boundaries. Don't be afraid to be the one who says enough. You're not obligated to forgive the unforgivable. But if one day the other person comes with a less closed heart, open the door a little. Sometimes, from the most painful disasters, something emerges that, even if not perfect, is at least true. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.